Well, hello, my beautiful reader friends, and welcome back or welcome for the first time if you are new here. My name is Lori Beth, and welcome to my little corner of the internet where I get into all of the bookish small talk. So, wouldn't you know it, another month has completely gone by, and it is time for a monthly wrap up video. But not only are we doing a monthly wrap up video today, we are doing a monthly wrap up video for the books that I read in January. It is now the beginning of March. We just finished February. I don't know where the time goes for me sometimes, I swear. But regardless, I still like to sit down and wrap up by month the books that I have read. And these are honestly my favorite videos to watch on booktube because it keeps me feeling very inspired to watch what other people are reading, things maybe I haven't heard of before, or maybe things that I have heard of, but I'm really waiting for a solid review from some people that I genuinely trust. So we are going to do the books that I read in January, and per usual, I am going to do this from the beginning of the month to the end of the month. So what I read at the beginning of January all through the end. And for January, I ended up reading 8 books in total. And so because we do have quite a few books to go over, we are going to go ahead and jump right in. All right, so starting with our very first book in January, and that was Foster by Claire Keegan. And I don't have a physical copy of this. I actually borrowed this from my library. I was very excited that I was able to just grab it and read it right away from my local library. And January was honestly like the month of Kindle for me. I read a lot of books on my Kindle in January. I don't know why. I was just really feeling like the ease of holding something small and being able to kind of pick up and read on the go throughout the entire month. So true to Claire Keegan's writing style, this is a very kind of powerful, very poignant story in a very short format. And I've said this a few times now, but I love books like that more and more as I get deeper into my reading journey. I sometimes love just like a very heavy hitting book that isn't necessarily like 3, 4, 500 pages long. I love being like left with a feeling of just emotion after reading something so short. And in this story, we follow a young girl who comes from a family who is struggling. They have quite a few mouths to feed, quite literally is the problem of their family. So her family for the summer takes her to live with, I believe it's an aunt and uncle who have lost a child of their own, and they don't have any other children. So for the summer, she spends her time with them so that her family can kind of just have a little bit of relief of not having to feed another like young person in the house. And like as you can tell just from the synopsis of that, it's a mixed bag of emotions, right? It's kind of hard to watch this family just very easily push their daughter onto another family, if you will, so that they just don't have to worry about her for a few months at a time. This young girl has a lot of feelings and emotions about it too. It's kind of hard. Like adolescence is hard enough, and then to be kind of uprooted from your home and then to just like live with basically strangers for months at a time was really hard for her to kind of grasp and understand. And then we have this other couple, this aunt and uncle of hers that have lost a child in the past and are now getting to care for this like lovely young girl for a couple of months. And you know that at the end of the story, she is going to go back with her family. So you start to struggle with your own emotions really, because you kind of see everybody start to thrive as the story goes on because of this situation. If you love stories about family, like the complexities of family, connection, love, like transformative human emotions and thoughts, it was just so beautiful. Again, very heavy hitting for such a short story, and really just like Claire Keegan has this way of evoking that emotion from you in less than 100 pages, and it still kind of blows my mind. So if you really like a lot of emotion behind your story and kind of like that family dynamic, like complexities within families, highly recommend this story. And again, it's not very long. So if you're really kind of wanting to try out Claire Keegan's writing, I would not wait to read this. And from there, I read Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. This is the second book in the Emily Wilde's book series. And I was really excited to read this. I loved the first book so much. I was so blown away by Heather Fawcett's writing. And I was really excited to get to this one. I did end up rating this one 4 stars, so I did really enjoy it. I don't think I liked it quite as much as the first one, but still really quite up there. So we do pick up right where we left off in the first story with our two main characters, Emily Wilde and her counterpart, Wendell Bambleby. This storyline was a little different because it went more into Wendell and where he kind of comes from and his backstory a little bit, but Emily did not take a backseat in the story at all. So I was kind of excited to see that. It did, though, because of that, feel like Wendell took a little bit of a backseat in this storyline, which I didn't love because he is a very funny, very charming character. In the first book, he brought this dynamic that was kind of like the counterbalance to Emily. She is a scholar. She's very structured. She likes to plan out her day, her life, what she's doing. And Wendell is kind of the exact opposite of that. So I wish that he would have been a little bit more present in this book. However, I really enjoyed kind of the fairy tale-esque that she brought back to this world. So Emily Wilde spends her time in different fairy realms, learning about fairies and kind of the way that they live and the way that they work. And this storyline was no exception to that. So there was a lot of learning about fairy and more specifically where Wendell comes from. What I do like about her stories is they lean a little bit more like that Holly Black style fairy tale where some of it is kind of fun and whimsical and cute, but other parts of it are a little dark and you can tell that fairies are not necessarily good creatures or a good species to get involved with. They're cunning and they're kind of mean and they will stab you in the back. So there's a good blend of all of that in the storylines. I did end up really liking how the book ended, and I know that the third one is coming out. I think it might have either just come out or it's coming out this month, but I wanted to read this now because I wanted to quickly jump into the third book in this series. So if you like a heavily fairy tale influenced storyline with a little touch of romance, these are just so fun and so charming. All of the characters in the books are very charming. Again, it leans much more towards the fairy tale side of things as opposed to just your romantic-y stories that you see today. So if you really like that kind of influence in your books, I would definitely recommend picking up this series. So from there, I read Swimming in the Dark by Tomasz Jedrzejewski. This was another book I got from my library, and I actually saw this in one of Carrie Can Read's reading wrap-ups, and the premise of it sounded right up my alley, and I was kind of coming off of the high of Claire Keegan's writing, and this seemed a little bit similar, but in just a slightly longer format. It was a beautiful story, and I did rate this one also 4 stars. A little bit more complex, so I thought I could read the synopsis to you so that I don't just completely butcher what this book is about, or at least maybe I could just clearly get it across to you instead of rambling on like I typically do. Set in early 1980s Poland against the violent decline of communism, a tender and passionate story of first love between two young men who eventually find themselves on opposite sides of the political divide. When university student Ludwig meets Janusz at a summer agricultural camp, he is fascinated yet wary of this handsome, carefree stranger. But a chance meeting by the river soon becomes an intense, exhilarating, and all-consuming affair. After their camp duties are fulfilled, the pair spend a dreamlike few weeks camping in the countryside, bonding over an illicit copy of James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room. Inhabiting a beautiful natural world removed from society and its constraints, Ludwig and Janusz fall deeply in love. But in their repressive, communist, and Catholic society, the passion they share is utterly unthinkable. So the story itself, the way this book started was so heartwarming. It kind of gave me that butterfly in my stomach type feeling. It's, these two people coming out of college. They're kind of wrapping up their college careers. They meet at this summer camp. So it gives you that summer camp vibe where things are so kind of carefree. They're in that crux between school ending and real life starting, and they meet each other. They have chemistry right off the bat, and they start to just live in this kind of dreamlike world, those few months of the summer when anything can happen, anything feels possible, and then they have to go back to real life. And when they do that, they realize very quickly that even though they have a lot of similarities and they have developed very strong and deep feelings for each other already, they are strictly on opposite sides of politics. This is the 1980s. Things are very tense in this part of the world, and more specifically for anybody in the LGBTQIA community, right? Like the 1980s being a man in love with another man. So not only do they have a few of these things going against them already, simply the world that they live in does not accept them with open arms. So tensions are very high, but they have very strong feelings for each other. So it was kind of a beautiful story of two people being in love, fighting for each other, but also just realizing that maybe love isn't enough. Maybe real life is harder than those few months of, sun-soaked days and long, cool nights in the summer. I found it to be such a moving story about two young people really coming into their own, a little bit of a coming of age story, right? Finding their way in life and what it is that they really want. I thought it was a great blend of a little like a historical drama, but also more importantly, kind of that sense of belonging again and your identity and just finding who you are in the world. It was beautifully written. Highly recommend. And from there, I read Penitence by Kristen Koval. This was a new release. I got this as an ARC. And then was actually part of kind of like a buddy read for this through the month of January. And then we had a sit down kind of like group chat with the author and the publisher after we finished reading the book together as a group. That was kind of a cool experience. I've never done that before. Like I've done a lot of buddy reads, but to have the author involved with it as well was actually pretty cool. I really enjoyed that experience. And the book is out now. So I do think I saw this on Book of the Month for February. So I'm sure it is still available for purchase there if you are on Book of the Month, but obviously from your local bookstore as well. And I did rate this one 3.75 stars. So I enjoyed it. I just had thoughts and feelings on it. But let's read the synopsis of this one together. When a shocking murder occurs in the home of Angie and David Sheehan, their lives are shattered. Desperate to defend their family, they turn to small-town lawyer Martine Dumont for help. But Martine isn't just legal counsel. She's also the mother of Angie's first love, Julian, a now successful New York City criminal defense attorney. As Julian and Angie confront their shared past and long-buried guilt from a tragic accident years ago, they must navigate their own culpability and the unresolved feelings between them. Spanning decades from the ski slopes of rural Colorado to the streets of post-9/11 New York City and back again, Kristen Koval's debut novel Penitence is an examination of the complexities of familial loyalty, the journey of redemption, and the profound experience of true forgiveness. Another family-based book for me this month. It was weird that I had a couple kind of human behavior family-centered stories in 1 month. It's something I enjoy, but not something I reach for all the time. This was a very interesting story. I was sucked in right away, mostly because it gave me like a true crime kind of vibe. There's a murder that occurs. Young family members are involved. The family is obviously involved. And then, as you heard, people from this family's past kind of get pulled in to assist with what's happening now. So the tensions and the complexities of the story just continued to build as time went on because you're learning about this family's dynamic, trying to figure out what exactly happened in this family, like what went wrong, how did this murder happen, and then also the past things that happened around this family. And although I love books like that about humans and their behaviors and relationships between people, I felt like it kind of just strayed from the original plot line. Like you open up with this murder and then you just get so heavily involved in the past, like things that happened in the past with these people. And then I felt like the murder part of the book, like it was there, but it was kind of in the background. And I honestly didn't love the way that the book ended because I felt like I didn't have a lot of resolve with the murder part. Like I wanted more detail on that part of the story. It was kind of what intrigued me in the first place, and I felt a little unsatisfied about that part. The character development was interesting, and you kind of started to feel much differently about certain characters in the book as you learned things about them, which I always enjoy because you're like, maybe I really like this person. And by the end of the book, you're like, actually changed my mind. That person is a total piece of garbage. So that is always interesting to me when an author can do that. And again, I think that kind of comes with being able to build characters and the complexities of characters. But I just didn't love how it ended. I just kind of wish that it would have picked a lane and stayed there. The main theme of the book, I do believe, was forgiveness and just kind of forgiving, whether it's yourself or people in your past or around you, so that you can live a happy, satisfied life. So again, I do appreciate some of the topics and the themes of the book, but don't give me something, like, don't tease me like that. Don't give me something and then not give me an answer to. I don't know. That part kind of drove me a little bit crazy. Writing was really great. But again, I just felt like it went into this direction of these people and their past and the history. And it was like building and building and building. And I didn't get the one thing that I wanted out of the book, which is the true resolve of what happened in the beginning. But I would highly recommend this one if you do like heavily character-driven books and complex relationships. And after that, I read The Stolen Heir by Holly Black, which is the first book in the Stolen Heir series, which is kind of like the spin-off series from the Cruel Prince series. Now, I mentioned The Cruel Prince in one of my most recent videos and how I don't talk about that series a whole lot, and I don't know why. I loved it. I loved it so much, and I can vividly remember starting that book and thinking, ooh, I don't know if this is going to be for me, because I am definitely a romantic-y girly. Like, I love ACOTAR and The Serpent in the Wings of Night and Crescent City. I like heavy romance fantasy books, and these are much different because Holly Black writes more fairy tale based fantasy. Like, they are more true to your traditional fairy stories, like old school fairy stories where the fairies are basically just terrifying and really mean, and there's lots of creatures in these worlds. And then I got really sucked in and I was like, wow, this is how fairy stories are written. Like, Holly Black, one of the best fantasy writers of our time. I said it. You heard it here. But anyways, I am just going down a complete rabbit hole at this point in time. Back to The Stolen Heir, which follows characters from the Cruel Prince series. I did rate this book 4 stars, so I really enjoyed it. But I'm not going to lie, I didn't like following these characters quite as much as the characters in The Cruel Prince. So that was a little bit of a bummer. However, Holly Black's writing continues to be some of my favorite fantasy writing to read. So in this one specifically, we follow Surin, who is living in the human world, kind of living just feral and in the woods and hiding out from her life in the fairy realm, where she is actually a queen. And she spends her time in the world of the humans, basically just like foraging for food in the woods and completely homeless. She is found by Prince Oak from the world of fairy, and he kind of enlists her to go on this mission to take down the current queen and kind of get her off the throne and get Surin back to where she belongs. So because of where these characters come from, the world of fairy, they are very used to betrayal, people stabbing them in the back, things going awry, which of course is what happens on this journey. But Surin can't help but feel things developing for this Prince Oak that came to bring her back to fairy. And she knows it's not going to go as planned because she's spent her entire life basically being used and abused and then abandoned by people. But of course, typical to Holly Black's writing, the atmosphere of these books are just so gripping. Like, you can imagine yourself in these fairy realms, and then she also blends together the human world on top of it. Like, they kind of bounce back and forth between these worlds. I also forgot how dark, like truly dark, her stories are, and I think that's why I like them so much, because they give you that fairy tale vibe. Like, again, when I first started reading The Cruel Prince, and I was like, I don't know, this feels a little bit childish. Like, I don't know if I love fairy tale based stories. And then you start to get to know some of the characters in fairy, and they are nasty. Like, some kind of grotesque things are happening in the world of fairy. Like, this is Game of Thrones, but in the realm of fairy. Like, that's what it feels like to me. The characters are diabolical. They're untrustworthy. They are trying to do whatever they can to get themselves ahead. So I did really enjoy being back in that world, but I didn't feel quite as connected to Surin and Oak as I did to the characters in The Cruel Prince. Like, Jude and Carden are probably one of my top fantasy couples ever. Like, I loved that series so much. So I was very excited to read this and kind of get that feeling back from her. I don't know what was missing from it. I don't know if it's these characters were both just kind of like just out of reach. They felt a little standoffish, that I couldn't connect with them. I don't know if that's what the problem was, but I just love Holly Black's writing and world building so much that I still really enjoyed the story. Will I continue on with this one? Probably. I probably will, just because I really, again, like Holly Black as an author and being in her kind of dark, gritty fairy worlds. I just wish I would have like had a little bit more connection with the main characters of this storyline, but definitely recommend if you know you like Holly Black. And if you haven't read Holly Black, definitely read The Cruel Prince. I will not ask you again. All right, after that, things took a turn. They went downhill a little bit. I'm just going to go ahead and preface it by saying that. And I read The City and Its Uncertain Walls by Haruki Murakami, my very first Murakami book, and I rated it 2.5 stars. It was kind of a bummer. And I have been itching to read something by Murakami for a very long time. And this was part of Leah's book club for the month of January. And I was like, you know what? Now's my chance. I'm going to pick up a Murakami. I'm going to read it. And I'm going to fall in love with this author that has like thousands of books that I get to now spend the rest of my life reading. That was not the experience I had. So it was a little bit of a bummer. But let's go into the synopsis of this one. That way I don't completely mess it up. And then we can talk about how I felt about it. Haruki Murakami's highly anticipated first novel in 6 years follows the narrator as his enduring memory of his formative teenage relationship leads him to the mysterious city and a disruption to the barriers between the real and shadow worlds. The long-awaited new novel from Haruki Murakami revisits a town his readers will remember, a place where a dream reader reviews dreams and where our shadows become untethered from ourselves. A love story, a quest, an ode to books and to the libraries that house them, and a parable for those strange post-pandemic times. The City and Its Uncertain Walls is a singular and towering achievement by one of modern literature's most important writers. So, oddly enough, like when I read the synopsis originally, I was like, ooh, this sounds very interesting. I like a coming of age story. That's kind of what it sounded like to me. And I love magical realism in a book. I mean, I am a fantasy girly through and through. I also like books of fiction. So to me, magical realism is almost kind of like that wonderful blend of the two where things are kind of like you don't really know what's real, you don't really know what's not real. And that's kind of like the whole point of magical realism, in my opinion. But this just felt a little confusing. Like the lines were blurred so much that you didn't really know what was going on. I also thought it was just kind of boring. I just didn't think that it was an interesting story. It felt very dry and very long. Felt a little bit juvenile at times, like the actual writing felt juvenile. And I couldn't tell if that was because it was a translated novel. Sometimes I know things literally get lost in translation, or they can't be translated in a way that just is maybe as fluid as its original language. So I don't know if that's what the problem was, but regardless, I just thought the story was kind of boring. It felt very slow, like the pacing was kind of off. It felt a little disjointed also because there are like different time frames in the book. It kind of wraps up at the end and does come together, but the whole middle part of it just felt so slow. And I think it was just losing my interest. There was also a few things I found odd. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give like actual spoilers of the book, but there's like these weird animals or like creatures in the book that they just kind of like call them creatures. And then suddenly like half of the book later, they have a name, and then they were like calling them, and I don't know. And then they were like calling them that name. And I'm like, why didn't they just call them this like 50 pages ago? I don't know. It all felt a little off, disjointed, slow, not my style. I was a little bummed about that. I am not going to completely write off Murakami. I know that there are a lot of thoughts and feelings out there about the way that he writes, more specifically about how he writes females and women. This book, at least, I mean, there were some things he says that you're kind of like, I think I noticed because I had that in the back of my mind from what people have said before. I didn't find anything like weird or perverted or grotesque, anything like that. But I just didn't love this particular book. And I guess it was a little bit of a letdown because I think of a lot of the books I know of his that are out there. This one sounded the most up my alley and I didn't really care for it. But I'm willing to try something else. So I guess if you have suggestions for his books below, I mean, I know like the very popular ones, but is there something that really stands out to you? If you've read a lot of his books, I would love a suggestion, leave it in a comment down below. Cause I don't know. I don't want to just like completely write someone off that has so many books and is quite a popular author, just based on one book. So yeah, I don't know. That one though was not great. I didn't love it. Did not love it. After that, I read Hot Air by Marcy Germansky, and this was an ARC that I received from NetGalley, so thank you so much to NetGalley and the publishers for the advanced copy of this book. And I rated this one 3.5 stars. This was sitting on my Kindle for a little while, and I kind of like had it in my back pocket because I really enjoyed her first novel, Hurricane Girl. I read it over the summer, and I didn't want to like read this one too soon, but I wanted to read it before it came out because I had an ARC, and I think it might have either come out in February or it's coming out this month. I'll double check on that. Marcy Germansky does write literary fiction, which is what this book was as well, and I was completely sucked in from the synopsis. A joyfully unhinged story of money, marriage, sex, and revenge unspools when a billionaire crashes his hot air balloon into the middle of a post-pandemic first date. Joni hadn't been on a date in 7 years when Johnny invites Joni and her daughter to dinner. His house is beautiful, his son is sweet, and their first kiss is, well, it's not the best. But Joni could convince herself it was nice. When Joni's childhood crush, a summer camp fling turned famous billionaire, crash lands his hot air balloon in Johnny's swimming pool, Joni dives in. Soon she finds herself alighting on a lost weekend with Johnny, the bad kisser, Jonathan, the billionaire, and Julia, his smart, stunning wife. Does Joni want Jonathan? Does Julia want her husband? Or Joni? Or Joni's beautiful little girl? Does Johnny want Julia? Does Jonathan want Joni or Julia, or maybe his much younger assistant, Vivian, who is tasked to fix it all? A tale of lust and money and lust for money. Hot Air is as astonishing as it is blisteringly funny, a delirious, delicious story for our billionaire era. What a wild ride. Like, can you read a synopsis like that and think to yourself you don't want to read that story? I clearly was like, request, please, love everything about this. And it was kind of a wild ride, literally a wild ride, and done in a shorter book, which again, I appreciate. I think this one was like 250 pages or so, like 210 pages, so even shorter than that. And it also took place over a weekend. So it's just a literal crash landing into this woman's first date with this guy who she doesn't really like feel chemistry with, but she's looking for love. She just wants to have a relationship. She's a single mother, and the whole weekend goes awry when this hot air balloon lands in their laps, and they have this kind of like unhinged weekend of getting to know each other, pushing and pulling against each other, thinking maybe one of them wants the other and what's going to happen here. It was absolutely wild. And in my personal experience, storylines that are short like that take place over a day or a couple of days, can go either way. It's either really good and makes sense, or it just doesn't. They drag on, the pacing always feels off, or it's like too fast and it didn't really work. This one was paced perfectly, and I think it ended exactly where it needed to. And it was kind of at the basis of it all, just a story of like, the grass isn't always greener type of thing. Like, we think we want these certain things in our life, and then we get a little glimpse at them and we're like, change my mind. Don't think I really want that at all. Definitely takesies, backsies on that one. So if you are a person that likes a good, just like a solid lit fic book, especially about some kind of like unhinged, money crazy, sex crazy people, don't wait on this one. Go and pick it up, and also pick up her other novel too. I really thoroughly enjoy her writing style and can't wait to read more by her. All right, and the very last book that I read in the month of January is An Earthquake is a Shaking of the Surface of the Earth by Anna Moschovakis. Sorry, I was reading it down here because I knew I was going to butcher that name. It looks absolutely beautiful, and I just... put my little Lori Beth spin on it as I usually do. But this was the book pick from my local bookstore where I'm part of. It's not like a book club, it's like a book subscription kind of, but it is a book picked for you each month by the bookstore for an independent author or publisher. And I am very excited to be a part of it because it opens my eyes to some things that I wouldn't necessarily pick for myself. And sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes that's a bad thing. In this case, kind of the latter. So I did end up rating this one 2.5 stars, so not really the best out of the entirety of the month, but let's read the back of this one together as well. After a seismic event leaves the world shattered, an unnamed narrator at the end of a mediocre acting career struggles to regain the ability to walk on ground that is in constant motion. When her alluring younger housemate, Tala, disappears, what had begun as an obsession grows into an impulse to kill, forcing the narrator to confront the meaning of the ruptures that have suddenly upended her life. The drive to find and eliminate Tala becomes an existential pursuit leading back in time and into a desolate, dust-covered city where the narrator is targeted by charismatic, healing ideologues with uncertain motives. Torn between a gnawing desire to reckon with the forces that have made her and an immediate need to find the stability to survive, she questions familiar figurations of light, shadow, authenticity, resistance, and the limits of personal transformation in an alienating world. Darkly comic, deeply resonant, and hallucinatory in tone. Let's just take another little look-see at this book. Look, not very big. Not very big. And oddly enough, I feel like it didn't go anywhere. Like there was no progression in the story. I was personally intrigued by it because I was led to believe this is going to be about a character that is like kind of slightly obsessive and almost drawn or pushed into the thought of murder because of this weird obsession she has with this woman that she lives with. But it was such an undertone to the entire story that I was left feeling a little like another case of like I wasn't getting what I was led to believe I would be getting in this book. It is very heavy on the magical realism, so much so that some things don't seem to make sense. Like I had a little bit of a hard time kind of following what was going on. It gave off kind of a post-apocalyptic feel, which I do enjoy reading about more than I realized. This world that they live in is in a constant state of shaking. Like there's almost always like a tremor in the earth. The earth shakes. Sometimes it's aggressively, sometimes it's not that much. You can barely feel it, but it comes and goes. But life has almost kind of shut down. Like people are not working. People are having a hard time getting food. They're kind of like, but also other things are still just carrying on as normal. I don't know. It was kind of a weird blend and not in a good way. Like it felt a little chaotic and hard to follow. And I kind of enjoyed the parts of the book where the narrator would go back into talking about her roommate and like finding her. And she's like, just suddenly like she just knows that she has to kill this woman. Like that's suddenly her goal. But it was very fleeting. It wasn't enough for me. And the rest of it surrounding that part of the storyline felt a little too disjointed. Like it was too chaotic to fully follow and understand. So whereas I liked the atmosphere of the book, with it giving off that post-apocalyptic feel, like that kind of vibe in the book, I just didn't feel like the storyline was fluid enough for me, and that's why I rated it so low. But it was an interesting read. So I guess, I don't feel like I wasted my time because it wasn't a very long book, but it just was not overwhelming, if that makes sense. All right, my friends, well, there you have it. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of January. And of course, I would love to know if you have read any of the books that we talked about in today's video, what your thoughts and opinions on those books are, or do you have a standout read from the month of January? Drop that in a comment down below because I'm always looking for suggestions, because if there's one thing my TBR needs, it is one more book added to it. As always, if you liked this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button because it always helps a girl out. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any of my other upcoming videos, go ahead and hit that subscribe button too. And of course, it has been an absolute blast, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next one.